Welcome everyone to WatchMock. My name is Phil Pasquarello. I'm the trial competition director at the Drexel University Thomas R. Klein School of Law. And I'm joined today by a really awesome guest who I would say this year is probably the most successful individual mock trial competitor at the law school level, if not the most successful individual competitor at in law school mock trial. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, my name is Enrico Trevisani. I'm one of the co-presidents of the trial team at UCLA School of Law. And yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me, Phil.
Of course. So I'll brag a little bit about Enrico here because I know he's too humble of a guy to do it for himself. But when I say Enrico was the most successful individual competitor this season, it's really not exaggeration. And Enrico will correct me on these numbers if I'm wrong. But he competed in 5 tournaments this year and won 4 of them, including what I would say are 2 of the 3 top tournaments in the country, one being the Tournament of Champions, which Enrico's team won in October or November this past fall, and the AAJ National Tournament, which is one of the 2 big national tournaments in the spring that they won back in April. In addition to those 2 tournaments, Enrico won the AAJ Regional, which is how they qualified for nationals. And then way back in October, he won a tournament called the Summit Cup in his first, or what I'll call his law school debut, and gave the closing argument in the final round of that tournament, which we're going to watch today. How did it feel? Like, now that it's been a couple of months, like, have you kind of reflected on how insane of a run this was for you?
Definitely had, yeah, just a little bit of reflection in like the weeks and months that followed the end of the season. I guess like it hasn't really still like hit me what not just myself, but what like UCLA Law was able to do this past year. I think because I chose UCLA Law in part because of the trial program. I want to be a trial lawyer, and I wanted to just surround myself with people who could make me better, not just my professors and coaches, but also my teammates. And I think in part by just being surrounded by so many talented trial advocates, it can kind of distort like your own expectations for yourself and for the team. And it wasn't really until after this season that I just sort of looked back and was like, wow, like we were able to do that. And yeah, it's just been a wild ride, man. Like I think maybe it's also because it's all been online this past year that it's hard to feel like you've done something meaningful when you've just been talking to a webcam from the inside of your bedroom, which is where I was competing this year. But it's definitely something that I'm going to carry with me forever this past season. And it's definitely something that it's one of the things I'm most proud of, for sure. Just that we were able to compete at that level so consistently.
In fact, and you may or may not remember this, but I distinctly remember standing with you on the first floor of the Klein Institute when you were competing at Trial by Combat back in 2018, talking about where you were going to go and telling you that I thought UCLA and working with Justin Bernstein would be just an excellent fit. So I'm not going to totally take credit for all your success, but I guess my question for you is, what do you think was kind of the biggest or the most substantial change you made kind of transitioning from excellent amateur competitor to excellent law school competitor? Because I think you would agree, even after a year of competing, that there are some pretty big differences between a successful collegiate competitor and a successful law school competitor.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I think for me, I wanted coming to like UCLA and coming to like a new coach and like a new program, I really didn't want to bring any sort of like bad habits with me, even the ones I wasn't aware of. So I did make a conscious effort to really go back to the basics of like learning, how to do a direct across, and also like why we're doing those things the way that we do them. I went to we have like, and I'm sure Drexel has something similar for your trial team. Like we have a summer boot camp thing for our new members, some of our members who have never done mock trial. And I made sure to attend all of those so that I could be a part of those lessons where we're breaking things down at a very basic level. But in terms of like the differences, I knew that I would actually have to become way more proficient at arguing, not just objections and not just like knowing the rules of evidence, but also like motions. I think that's one of the biggest differences between AMTA and law school is there's way more substantive argument on preliminary matters, on the motions in limine, and then mid-trial motions. Sometimes even motions after case in chief, but before closings. So that was something that I really had to learn just like from the beginning. But I think in terms of like prep and actually going to competitions, one of the biggest differences is also just that that you're way more just realistic in how you go about portraying a case, and I as you mentioned, like I was also a witness in AMTA, and I loved doing the like crazy witnesses with the accents and like the small AMTA isms where you're like saying opposing counsel's name and like pointing to them, like things like that make AMTA a lot of fun, that when you get to the law school level and you're really trying to bridge the gap between, at least for me, doing this for fun as an undergrad into doing this in real life, using the law school experience as that transition period and learning how to do things just more realistically. So a lot of it was just like learning how to cut out the stuff that doesn't actually work in the real world, although I'm sure that there's a lot of that I've yet to learn.
Yeah, I mean, I've been fortunate enough just in my time as a coach to work with some really talented competitors. And I think the thing that sets apart really talented people who have okay results at the competitions and do just okay from the ones who do really, really, really well are the ones who never feel like they know everything, and they want to continue to learn and find ways to improve and take each practice really seriously. Like the thing that you said at the beginning, you didn't want to come in with any kind of preconceived, this is the way I do things, or this is what I think is good. And you were kind of a blank slate. And when I told Justin that you were coming on and that we were going to watch this tonight, he paid you a really, really nice compliment in that sense. And he said that in all of his years coaching, which is obviously a long time, you have been the easiest student he's ever worked with, which in my view, I think, especially at UCLA, there are a lot of talented students, but I think that probably speaks to why you've been so good this first year. It's just, it's evident that how much work you've put into improve even as good as you were back in college. So kudos to you. I think it's all been really well deserved.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. And like, especially coming from you, like I literally remember watching 2018 Top Gun live stream because I was prepping for TBC at that time and like wanting to just like see this at the highest level. And man, like I didn't even know who you were. I just was super impressed from the start. And so then actually getting to meet you at Trial by Combat later that summer, and keeping in touch with you since then, like I really, really admire everything that you've done, not just as a competitor, but as a coach. And so it means a lot coming from you.
Well, I appreciate that. What we're about to watch is Enrico's closing argument from a tournament called the Summit Cup, hosted by Denver Law. And law school is a little bit different than college mock trial in the sense that there are a lot of individual tournaments with individual case files and very specific rules as to how the tournament works. So what makes this tournament unique and sets it apart from some other tournaments is a couple of things. First, the way that you get invited is by winning a tournament the year before. And so this is really the elite of the elite in terms of programs that are invited. This also was the first online team mock trial tournament that happened all year. at the law school level at least. And so I think at any level, because this was very early in October. And so this was really new for all of us. For you, I'm sure it felt really strange. And they live streamed all of these rounds over the course of that weekend, because I think they wanted people to see what online team mock trial looked like, separate from the one-on-one context that we saw with Top Gun and Combat and Gladiator. And so I remember watching this closing and just thinking, I don't know how you top that. Why don't you give us some background about this round and about what the case was about?
Sure. So this case was was really chaotic, but it was also really fun. So it was based on the whole Tiger King debacle, loosely based on like Carol Baskin allegedly killing her husband. So it was a wrongful death case. And in this trial, I am representing the defendant. So we're representing Karen Beja, who is also a cat lady. And basically, the plaintiff, who is the daughter of her deceased husband, has brought this wrongful death claim against her. And for our defense theory, and I think this was probably the most fun theory that we did this past year, at least that I did. Our theory was basically that he died in a plane crash and crashed somewhere in the ocean, and that's why his body had never been found, which was supported by facts in the case file, but it definitely wasn't an obvious way to take the case. And so I think we
intended, I don't think.
I'm sorry, what?
Wasn't what the case writers intended.
Right. And I think it ended up throwing a lot of teams off. But for this round, so we were actually going against your team in the final round. And I will say Drexel is always a pleasure to either go against in real trial or scrimmage. And so I think looking back, like this team was one of, if not the toughest opponents that we faced all year. And so I think it's also worth noting that I made and lost an objection battle right before this closing starts. So at least I felt like when I was giving the closing that it like took me a couple of minutes to kind of really warm up to it, because I objected to something that opposing counsel had said in the plaintiff closing. We had that argument, I lost it, and then I started my speech. But what you're about to see here is the defense closing. And yeah, it was a super fun trial.
Yeah, so just in case people who are watching this are wondering, this was a Drexel UCLA final. This was just before I became the trial competition director at the law school. And so I was coaching another team, but I had not worked with this team really at all. And so I was a bystander or an observer watching the live stream, really, really super excited. And it was such a fun round. So we're going to get into it.
Let's do it.
Own memory and leave it at that when defense is ready to close.
Yes, Your Honor. Before I begin, permission to publish any exhibits that have been entered into evidence on screen?
Yes, you may.
So first off, where are you in this video?
So I am in my bedroom in my apartment in Los Angeles, where I lived last year. You obviously can't tell watching this video, but my room really did not have that much space at all. So my setup was, it was not as nice as probably some other people's setups, because I literally had to balance the webcam. So we as you can see, like we used our laptop camera, and then when we actually got up to do stuff, we would use webcams. So I had my webcam balanced on a tripod on a box on my bed, and then I also had like a mini desk. So both of these things are just off the side of my bed, and there's probably, I don't know, like 3 feet of space behind my bed, and that is the entire space I had to work with. So I really had to mess around with the cameras a while to kind of get this clean just blank white shot. But yeah, I always thought it was kind of funny. And me and my co-counsel always, this was a nice little feature of Zoom. We would always do our speeches and examinations barefoot. And so I thought that was always a fun thing that I knew about, that I knew the judges didn't know about. And I don't know, a nice little factoid, I guess.
Yeah, shout out Jack Ayers, who was your partner for a lot of the season, who's fantastic. And actually, my students revealed to me something similar, like midway through the year. They're like, we don't wear shoes when we compete. I was like, I guess that makes sense, but I'm kind of horrified at the same time that you guys are just like prancing around your bedrooms with like no socks. It's kind of weird. But okay.
Oh man, the no socks, that's Jack's thing. All right, I always wore socks, but never shoes.
May I proceed?
You may.
2,969. That's how many days it's been since Lou Donaldson went missing. And in 2,969 days, no one has found his body. Not the plaintiff, not the police, not the private eyes.
Awesome line.
Why? Because they were looking for a murder victim. Even after Lou Donaldson's van was found at an airstrip, no one considered the obvious. That when an aging man flies alone at night without his glasses, his plane might go down. That's why no one has found Lou Donaldson's body. You see, when someone's murdered, it's hard to hide a body. But when a plane goes down in the middle of the ocean, it's hard to find a body. Members of the jury, this was not a crime. It was a crash. Today, the plaintiff.
Just such a good intro paragraph. Like, it's clear what you're saying. There's one-liners. Like, it's just, you perform it so slow and dramatic. It's just so good. This is textbook. This is the way that you're supposed to do this. Content-wise, performance-wise, it's just perfect. And how much did you guys work on this particular part of the closing before this tournament?
Well, it's hard to say. In terms of memorizing any part of the closing, I do try and really nail down. It's like a rule of mock trial, like primacy and recency. I will put just a little bit extra time into memorizing the intro and like whatever I'm going to say last, just so I can just feel really good about going into my speech. I will say it's interesting that you point out that I'm talking slow, and you're not the first person who's mentioned that to me recently. And it's funny to me because naturally I don't really talk slow, like you can probably tell talking to me now. That is something I really had to beat out of myself. And it's something that I struggled with for a long time when I was, learning the ropes of mock. And eventually I literally just had to like start writing at the top of my legal pad, just like slow, loud, confident. And every single time I would look down, I would just like have to remind myself, just like, and my coach always says, like, if you speak even slower than you think
right
you need to, and then that's probably still too fast. It's taken me a while to like finally get to that like pace where I can speak slowly during a trial and it's comfortable.
Yeah.
And the plaintiff alone had the burden of proof. They had to show that each and every element of their case was more likely than not true. Today, they failed to meet that burden because of two simple facts. Let's take them one at a time. Fact number one, this was not a crime. Today, the plaintiff spent an awful lot of time trying to convince you that Lou Donaldson is dead. No one disputes that. The question is how Lou Donaldson died. Folks, there's no evidence.
Is that scripted, folks?
No, so I would have to go back and check. The thing is, so I like to be folksy, and my coach knows that, so he'll usually like give me like an allowance of like one or two, like max two folks per speech, but where the folks comes out just depends on what which performance I'm giving. So I think there might be another one coming, but I don't think that one was scripted. I just do it when it feels right, you know?
I liked it. So I have to ask you about this because I've heard a lot about this over the last year or so since you've been at UCLA with Justin.
Oh no, I know where this is going.
Tell us about the Trevisani Tax.
Oh man, the Trevisani Tax. Okay, so as your listeners can probably tell, I am a loquacious individual. I'm talkative, and I have struggled and continue to struggle with adding unnecessary words to sentences. So, you know, Justin, my coach, likes to make fun of me, and he says that, you know, any given question that any given statement or question that I'm doing in a trial, I'm just going to add on another 20 to 30% extra words than is what's actually like written in my script when, you know, we're writing everything. And so he calls it the Trevisani Tax. For an example, he'll be like, I'll be asking like, so you were there that day? And instead I'll be like, so you mentioned earlier that you went to the store and that store was there earlier that day. So you went there that day, and you just like, I don't know. It's not that bad, but yeah, it's something that my team likes to make fun of me for.
That's pretty good. I can relate.
Of homicide here? Sure, they told you a dramatic story where Lou Donaldson comes out, he tells his daughter, if something happens to me, tell the police to look into Karen.
So we didn't watch the plaintiff's closing, but their theme was, I think, something to the effect of, if something happens to me, be sure to look into Karen, which was a quote that the decedent allegedly said to his daughter, who was the plaintiff in the case. Was this part scripted, or did you add this in understanding it was their theme?
So we had like something here, but I like noted that it was something that was really being stressed by their side. So I took the exact language, either from the closing or from the plaintiff's testimony. I can't quite remember. But it wasn't a thing where I like fully just like off the fly. I already had like something written there. I just kind of like replaced what I was going to say with, you know, what Drexel had just done.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I coach my students to do in terms of being responsive. And people ask me like, how do you get better at being responsive, particularly in closing arguments? And I say, by being the least responsive possible in some ways. That's very confusing, but the point that you just made demonstrates that point really well, which is, I tell my students, if you want to seem responsive, change the first sentence of, you know, a point that you're making in a closing, and make it seem like it's off the cuff. You know, do you remember when they said over and over and over, it was, anything happens to me, look into Karen. He said that all trial, go into your script. And then everyone thinks, wow, Enrico is making this whole thing up off the cuff about their theme and being responsive, when in reality, you're sticking to the script that you guys have crafted and have come up with, and it looks really smooth and seamless and impressive. And I think you did it really well here.
Yeah, I think one thing that I've gotten better at since starting law school is, I mean, obviously you want to be, memorized, and that's always going to help across any level of mock trial. But realizing that not only that I had to memorize what I was saying, but also I had to understand exactly why I was saying everything that I was saying, so that, like in this case, where there was like a line that was probably similar to what I ended up saying, I knew why I was saying that to push back on what the plaintiff's likely theory was going to be. And because I knew why that line was important, it was really easy for me to just last second just take it out of my closing and put in the new one. There's a few other areas in this speech. I think there's a point where I'm actually like clearly being responsive, where I'm like looking down at something I wrote down. Even that section was replacing something else that I had written there that was, a kind of like a similar point. So I think that that's definitely an important takeaway from just being responsive generally, is that, like you said, like it actually comes down to just being super prepared, knowing the case well enough that you can make those decisions on the fly, but it's actually something that you've already thought about.
Right.
I said it over and over and over again. They need you to believe that statement, that Lou actually said that. They said that it came straight from Lou Donaldson's lips. No. Straight from the plaintiff's lips.
Awesome line.
The plaintiff who wants $10 million.
So with that's kind of like a sub theme that you're going to hear in this speech. Like, it came from the plaintiff who wants $10 million. But that is an example right there of like, that was something that the plaintiff closer had just said. Like, it came straight from Lou Donaldson's lips. And so I can't remember, it was honestly probably my co-counsel who caught it and was like flip that, use that, because we already had that little sub theme of saying like, no, it was the plaintiff. Like, no, it was actually the plaintiff.
Right.
So it was really easy to just drop in there.
A dramatic story about a shouting match between Lou Donaldson and his wife. Who did it come from? The plaintiff, who wants $10 million. We heard a dramatic story about a break-in, that Miss Beja broke into her husband's office, stole financial documents, that she was there with someone that had lock cutters. The police were there.
I love the way you deliver those couple lines. Like, there was this big deal. There was a guy with lock cutters. Like, the police were there. Like, it's such a, like, and again, the thing that you keep saying, understanding why you're saying certain things is critical, because in this situation, obviously you're trying to convey that her story is ridiculous and is just a lie. And you do such a good job, everything with your hands, the way you're saying the words, with, you can see your face just like in the still here, like so spot on. And I think that's what made this speech, I think obviously was just incredibly well written, go from really good to just unbelievable. And like I said over and over now, I think the best thing of the year, just so good.
Where's the jury? How many of the people that were there that day took the stand to tell you about it? Did you see an alarm, a report from the alarm company that an alarm went off? Did you see any police reports? Did any police officers take the stand to say that happened? No. It all came from the plaintiff, who wants $10 million.
So this is really another interesting point that I think is going to be helpful to someone who's watching this and trying to construct a closing argument, and trying to take some certain lessons here, because we talked about all the positive things. But a common thing that as a young competitor, I like to put in my closings that I've kind of shied away from as a coach is calling out my opponent for, did this witness say it? Did that witness say it? Why didn't they call this police officer? And it's not to say that I never do it, because sometimes it's called for. But I'm careful and really, I think really hard before I make that decision. So did you guys have any discussion about the risk of doing that, or whether that was going to be well taken at this particular tournament with this particular judging pool? What were your thoughts on that, if any?
Yeah, I will say, I don't know if we mentioned this, but I believe this tournament was it was truly just like a popularity contest. Like you weren't actually scored on every piece of content. I believe it was simply just like head to head, or just like
the ballot is literally, who do you like better?
Exactly. So we didn't really necessarily think about how every little bit was going to play. And I totally see the concern with doing that, especially in a closed universe, like mock trial is, saying, really leaning on the argument like, oh, opposing counsel didn't call this witness, like, where's this person? And as a judge, that's something that I take note of too, if it's, clearly something that they're staking their case on. I think with this particular section of the closing, because our entire kind of tenor behind this, our thinking behind this was that, they are treating this like a murder, but this is a wrongful death case. And so what we're suggesting here, which is that the plaintiff has made up this entire story, we're suggesting that she's making it up, and that if this actually happened, that she would have taken steps to make sure that those people came in to testify. I think your point is well taken, though, and I think that we don't spend too much time on it. Like, I think I'm about to move on from it. And it's something that you have to be careful to not stake too much of your case on, because you can't really change the facts of your mock trial case.
Sure, they showed you some photographs. They showed you this photograph here of the gate, that it was broken, that this is proof that Miss Beja broke in. Members of the jury, something's missing from this photograph. Miss Beja.
Maybe I don't know the case that well, but like, how did she break in through this tiny hole?
That's what I should have said.
And if you think about it, the story that the plaintiff needs you to believe about this break-in, it just doesn't add up. Why would Miss Beja need to break in to the office when she was a co-owner of the company?
I will say my co-counsel Jack did an absolutely stellar job on the timing of the sharing screen. And that's something that you don't always think about when you're prepping, like, for a trial on Zoom. But it's something that we took the time to like practice, is the actual like cues, and knowing exactly, like, when I say this word, that's when you share the screen.
Yep.
And there was a couple of times where Jack had to basically, because he, I would be doing something that wasn't written down, something that he couldn't be following along. And so he just had to kind of feel it and just kind of sense like he's done with that point where he's about to start this. And so in this speech in particular, I definitely think Jack killed in a good way. He really killed the transitions of the slides and everything.
I totally agree.
Now today, opposing counsel also spoke at length about a request for a temporary restraining order. Members of the jury.
What were you looking at off screen?
So that I was looking at, I was looking at my laptop, trying to see if it was already on screen. But maybe you can tell this is like the most indignant I get in the whole speech. I'm like, request, like my voice gets so high. It was because like that was a point of contention with opposing counsel, is like the opposing counsel had called it a restraining order during the trial a couple of times, and we objected both times and said, like, Your Honor, this is a request for a restraining order. And so I added that little emphasis for the closing because it was just something I was still heated about, apparently.
So like watching it, when I'm watching it, I see you look off screen and I'm assuming that, like you said, you're looking at your computer screen waiting for an exhibit to pop up, but then an exhibit doesn't pop up and you just look dramatically back at the camera. So I just like assumed it was like planned or something.
Members of the
There it
jury,
is.
let's
Oh,
be
it does
clear.
come up. Okay.
This request was denied. At no point, no matter how much the plaintiff wants you to believe it, at no point was there a restraining order against Karen Beja. They also called Taylor Pride to the stand. She spoke at length about handwriting. She spoke to you about a will. She talked about this will, all the work that she did around it, all the surrounding circumstances. It was pretty compelling, Your Honor. It was almost distracting enough to make me forget that this is a wrongful death case. It's not a forgery case, members of the jury. It's not a probate case. They have to show specific conduct from Miss Beja killed Lou Donald.
I don't know. I made some dumb mistakes that I don't normally make, like saying Your Honor instead of members of the jury,
I've done that.
or just like slipping up. You could tell that I had to repeat what I was saying a couple of times when I, flubbed my words. But I think one thing that I appreciated about this speech was that even like in spite of those imperfections, I think they kind of added a little bit of character to the speech, honestly. And I was able to just kind of like push through them and not really like focus on them until I watched myself afterwards.
And they failed. Today, they said that Miss Beja's behavior was suspicious on August 17th of 2012. Members of the jury, I want you to think about that for a moment, the story that the plaintiff is telling you. Because if Miss Beja, years after the fact, after she had time to think, came up with a story about what she did that night, don't you think that she could have come up with something better? You see, the plaintiff wants to have it both ways. On the one hand, Miss Beja is a master criminal. She can make a body disappear without a trace of evidence. On the other hand, she wasn't smart enough to come up with something better. Members of the jury, so far I've focused on the evidence the plaintiff did present. But let's remember the evidence that the plaintiff didn't present. Miss Beja was investigated thoroughly. Not once, not twice, 3 times. First, the police came into her home. They searched every square inch.
Great gesture, great use of your space, searched every square inch. I mean, those are the little things that I think make a really good closing, an excellent closing. Just like, and you do it throughout, like from 8, like I said it at the beginning with the intro. I mean, just throughout, the performance on this is just off the charts good.
Found nothing. Then the insurance company paid Chris Renard to look for any reason to deny Miss Beja's claim. Then the plaintiff sent folks to investigate Miss Beja. What did all of these investigations have in common? They found zero, zip, zilch, nothing.
All right, I got to know 2 things. Number 1, I got to know, was zero, zilch, nothing written into the closing?
Like, it was like when I was writing it with my coach, it was like, he's like, you should say zip, zilch. You should do some sort of like folksy alliteration. And at first I wasn't into it. But then I just like practice like not smiling and not laughing and just like really leaning into it once I was going to say it. And it ended up working out. But yeah, that was a line that was written.
It is really good. The other performance question I have on that line is, and we'll watch it back in a second so you can see what I mean. You went, first off, your gesture, I don't know if this was planned, but it was, I liked it. It was like zero, zilch, nada. Like it was just like really, generally I don't like punctuating your words with gestures like zero, zilch, nada. Like generally I don't like that. But here it worked. And on the last one, it was like kind of delayed. Like you said something like zero, zilch, nothing. Was that where you've tried to remember nothing? Was it, did you take that pause deliberately? Did you just like have a moment? Like what happened?
It was deliberate. This was like the delivery of this line that allowed me to be comfortable doing it. So like it was like awkward before. I wanted to like create a little bit of contrast. So that was something that when I was working on just like the performance aspects of it after I'd already memorized it, setting up that contrast between zero, zip, zilch, nothing. So that was intentional, although
They found zero, zip, zilch, nothing. There's no eyewitness evidence that a crime took place here. No one took the stand and told you that they even saw Karen Beja and her husband together at all the weekend that he went missing. There's certainly no physical evidence of a crime, no blood, no DNA, no fingerprints. The plaintiff's own expert, she told us, we don't have the most basic elements of a crime here. Although admittedly, members of the jury, it wasn't easy to get those answers out of her. I mean, you heard when Mr. Ayers got up here to cross-examine her. He asked her, did you find DNA? She said, no, but not every crime leaves DNA. Okay. He asked her, did you find blood? No, but not every crime involves blood. Okay.
So I'm going to be critical of you for a second so far, because so far this has been amazing. And I'm not even sure that I'm correct about this, but I just want to get your take on it.
Sure.
The way that you're saying no, particularly, and we haven't watched this entire round, but my memory is that the expert that you're referring to was like pretty soft-spoken, was someone you probably don't want to like attack on crossbook. I think she wasn't like loud and in your face. She was like pretty soft-spoken, I think. Were you concerned that someone was going to say, hey, I don't really like your impersonation of her with the whole no thing? And obviously, particularly in this situation, because this obviously wasn't something you planned or something that, you could script out, because Jack's questions were very specific and her responses were somewhat specific. And so was this something that I think if you had gone forward in the competition, if there was another round after this, you would have been critical of yourself about, that you would have talked about with Justin and Jack and your other coaches and teammates?
I think I would agree that you have to be really careful, especially when you're just like not impersonating, but calling back to a witness's statement. I think in this case, what struck me about this witness was that she was very soft-spoken and very just like polite on direct, and then on closing or on cross, Jack was simply just asking her like, did you find a body? Like, did you find blood? Did you find DNA? And every single time on those answers, she said no, but that's totally normal for a case like this to not involve any DNA. And it was just like a moment where, we really felt like the judge was also picking up on the fact that the witness was fighting unnecessarily, just like adding on and adding on. And so in the pre or post-trial break before closing, discussing it with Jack, because that was the moment I felt like we really were able to, for lack of a better term, like create a little bit of distance in the round. It seemed very, very close up until that cross.
Yep.
And when she was just really, and Jack, Jack did really well when he crossed her. But when she was just fighting and giving him this chance to like look really good, I knew that that was the moment that we had to just like zero in on for the closing and make the most out of it. So to answer your question, I probably would have changed, I would change like the tone with which I was doing it, but I think it's probably just a byproduct of me being like really hyped for this part of the speech, because we knew like, and that's like when mock trial is the most fun, when you are just going on the fly. You've never said the words that you're saying before. It's based on something that the jury just saw and you're just doing it. And I think it was helpful in terms of building up my confidence for the rest of the speech. But yeah, I think I would probably try and mediate the tone there a little bit and try not to be overtly like, offensive or anything that could possibly be construed by a judge as being like rude.
Yeah, and I think to switch sides on the argument for just a second, if there's one type of situation where you can do that, it's when you are the defense in a case where an investigator did a shoddy job and is accusing your client of killing someone. And this is that situation. So I think if there's ever a time we're gonna get away with going a little bit over the top in that sense, this is the time.
Right.
Mr. Ayers asked her, "Did you find a body?" She said no, but not every crime has a body, involves a body. Maybe opposing counsel, maybe they can point you to an example of a murder where there's no blood. Maybe they can find you a case where there was a murder and no DNA. Maybe they can dig deep and find you a case where there was a murder and no body. Members of the jury, a murder without any of those things, that's a murder that didn't happen. Now, normally, when you accuse someone of killing another human being, normally you have evidence.
So I want to watch this again.
That's a murder.
And before we watch this one line, I want to point out something. We've talked a lot about your pacing in this speech. And here you do something in terms of your pacing that I've never seen anybody else do. And I would guess if anybody tried to replicate it, it probably wouldn't work. And you don't always do it, but I've seen you do it a number of times over the year. And you say almost like one word at a time. And in that line that we just watched, you said, normally when you accuse someone, and then the rest of it. And it's just so good. And it makes you hang on every single word, literally. So were you being deliberate with your pacing there? And actually, was it purposeful that you were going that slow and literally stopping and starting between a couple of those words? Or were you just trying to remember your lines?
No, yeah. So it totally wasn't purposeful. And when I watched myself, like that was something that immediately stood out to me. I think why it works is that whenever, and this actually happened multiple times in this speech. It's already happened a couple times and it'll probably happen a couple of more times. Where when you are in that moment where you're like, what's my next line? Or like, did I forget something that I was trying to say? Or just that quick, like, where am I?
Yep.
Finding a way to like not let that throw you off. And so I've learned that rather than like stumbling over my words, which I did in my early years of mock trial, or just like pausing, and the worst thing you can do is like admit that you made a mistake or like break the fourth wall and like reference your mistake or say sorry. It's something I had to get better at over the years, but this was an instance where I just forgot what I was going to say. I just slowed down and thought of the next word and just try to sell it and make it seem like it wasn't something that I like was worried about, or better yet, that it was something that I had actually planned to do. But no, I didn't plan this delivery, and it was something that I noticed as well.
Yeah, and one of the things that I coach my students to do is it's obviously good to be slow because it's easier to listen to, and it's helpful in terms of the people that are scoring you to follow along if you're slow. But it's also helpful to the person who's performing because it gives your brain an opportunity to catch up. And so to have the wherewithal in a big moment like this to forget your line momentarily and just stick to the fundamentals of keep it slow, never act like I'm losing. We're about to hear what I would say is the best line of the year. Like if there was like an award show for like top 10 lines of the year, this would be number one. And when we hear it, I'm going to ask you for the backstory behind it.
That didn't happen. Now, normally, when you accuse someone of killing another human being, normally you have evidence. At the very least, you have a theory. A theory is Colonel Mustard in the library with a revolver. Their theory is Karen Beja in the somewhere with the something.
So tell us the backstory behind the infamous Karen Beja in the somewhere with the something.
Oh, well, man, backstory. So I am a huge Clue fan. I love Clue. When I was a little kid, I always loved playing the game with like my family. And when we were working on the speech, I'm trying to remember if it was something that I mentioned or if it was something that my coach suggested, but it was one of those things where like once we wrote it down, we were like, we don't know if that's gonna fly. Like it seems like a little bit cheeky. It seems like we're making like light of a very serious situation. And so it was a discussion about whether or not it was something we were going to keep. But then after we started scrimming with it and running it against other teams, it was something that most of the judges afterwards noted about the closing that they liked. So it was something like, and then once I had already given it a couple of times and I really knew the delivery, I just like really leaned into it. But no, I love that line, and I'm definitely gonna steal it from myself and use it again in like a future speech, like any sort of speech where, yeah, there's just like some sort of investigation and you know that's really shoddy and they don't have anything to prove their case. I think it's an applicable line for sure.
It's a great line, right? It's an awesome line, but the way that you sell this line is just unbelievable. And I'm going to play it back so everyone can watch it again with this in mind. Watch your hands, watch your face, like all of those small, like subtle details that bring the line to life. And I mean, I don't think it would have been as good if it weren't for the way you performed it.
Is when you accuse someone of killing another human being, normally you have evidence. At the very least, you have a theory. A theory is Colonel Mustard in the library with a revolver. Their theory is Karen Beja in the somewhere with the something. The plaintiff has failed to meet their burden. So you might be asking yourself, okay, if she didn't kill him, then what happened? If this wasn't a crime, then what was it? That brings us to point number 2.
Can I just say for our audience that we are like roughly 1 hour into this show, and we were on reason number 1 of the closing for that entire time.
It's only a 2-reason closing.
Yeah,
and
no,
the first one was longer.
It was a crash. Today, we learned that Lou Donaldson loved to fly. He flew all the time, especially to Central America. And where was his van found? But an airstrip. Members of the jury, this is actually the biggest clue that we have as to what happened the night that Lou went missing. The plaintiff told us that when he drove that van away on August 17th, she didn't know where he was going, but that van was found at an airstrip just 40 miles away from the office, and Lou Donaldson, he was never seen again. Now, the plaintiff did the best that they could to explain away, wave away this explanation of events. They talked about these glasses. You heard opposing counsel. He tried to get that point out there multiple times. He was blind as a bat. He couldn't even get onto the runway without those glasses.
And I'll give you a shout out there. That's incorporation, because blind as a bat was a line that the plaintiff's witness used on cross with you. He was blind as a bat. He never would have been able to get off the runway. And really good incorporation of that line of the cross, which I thought was probably memorable for your jurors.
Members of the jury, who did that testimony come from? I mean, the experts in this case, they can tell you he never flew without his glasses, which we agree. He needed those glasses to fly safely, but who told you that he couldn't do anything without them? The plaintiff, who wants $10 million. They said, well, he didn't tell anyone that he was going to Costa Rica or anywhere else that weekend, so he must not have gone. Members of the jury, we know that Lou Donaldson would often take off and he wouldn't tell anyone about his trip until afterwards. They say we don't have a flight log. We don't know that he had any plans to fly that day. And members of the jury, that's true. Lou Donaldson, he didn't log his flights. That means that no one at the airstrip knew that he needed help, and no one in the air knew to avoid him.
What a good substantive point. I mean, the way that I'm assuming teams were combating your theory, or trying to at least, was to say there's no proof that he actually went to Costa Rica, which was a common defense. He's somewhere in Costa Rica, he's not dead. And you guys actually took that point and flipped it on its head and said, yeah, there's no evidence, because and one of the things that was missing was a flight log, like we're talking about here. And the fact that there's no flight log proves our case that there's, no one would have known that this plane was up in the air. No one would have known to look for him. So just what a clever way to take a really bad fact for most defense teams and make it a positive fact for your very specific theory. I just thought that.
Today, the plaintiff's expert, she testified that she sent folks to Costa Rica, that there was no evidence that Lou Donaldson even stepped foot in Costa Rica. And we agree. Lou Donaldson took off that night. He just never landed. Maybe they'll tell you there's no evidence of a plane crash here, but the truth is, no one looked for evidence of a plane crash. The police, they searched here in Statesville. The plaintiff sent investigators to Costa Rica, but no one searched the 2,200 miles in between. The fact is, there is evidence of a plane crash. A plane crash explains why there's no blood. A plane crash explains why there are no eyewitnesses. A plane crash explains why 8 years later, no one has found Lou Donaldson's body. All of the evidence that is missing from their theory is explained by ours. Members of the jury, in a moment, opposing counsel is going to come back up here. I expect that they'll mock the idea of a plane crash. That's why you have to ask yourself a critical question. What is more likely? That a woman who cares for cats was able to pull off the murder of the century without leaving a speck of physical evidence, of evading 3 different investigations? Or that an aging pilot flying alone, flying at night, flying 2,200 miles, flying without his license, flying without his glasses, didn't come home. Members of the jury, I submit to you that our version of events is far more likely. But we didn't have the burden. The plaintiff had the burden. Not a burden of rumors, not a burden of speculation, a burden of proof. Today, they failed to bring you that proof. We ask that you return a verdict in favor of Miss Beja, because this was not a crime. It was a crash. Thank you for your time.
So there it was. Like I said, what I think is, and I hope anyone who stuck with us through this would agree that that was just off the charts good. I mean, when you sat down at the end of that, did you feel like that was a special closing? And I think we won the round.
I don't know, when you're done closing, I feel like you always just have like the adrenaline pumping. I did feel like we won after that. I really felt though like Jack's cross, it wasn't that I like won the round with the closing, is that I just like didn't screw it up for us. Like I just kind of like kept going what we had. Like I felt like Jack's cross was really just like the bump that I personally needed going into that closing. But I did feel good because there was a lot that we changed and there was a lot that we did on the fly, especially when I'm just sort of like responding to different arguments brought up by the plaintiff. We have like if you were to actually see the written speech, that part was just like bullet points, and many of which could change, none of which was like permanent. And so that also made it tough for Jack to actually like follow along, be able to do the transitions. But I knew that given how good our opponent was, that we were going to have to really pull out all the stops in that speech. So I felt good afterwards. I knew that I made like some dumb mistakes. I mean, if you've made it this far in the video, like you're a trooper, true mock trial nerd. But if you watch the speech, you know that I messed up quite a bit, like in terms of just like fumbling over my words, making small mistakes. I said like evading 3 different investigations. And so I'm always very critical of myself anytime like a small mistake like that happens that I know could be easily fixed. But I was still really proud because, I felt like all things considered, we had pulled it off, and it worked out.
Well, like I said at the top of this, by any metric you want to look at, most points, most ballots, most wins in rounds, most tournament wins, best hair, you were the best competitor this year.
Oh, man.
One of the best competitors this year. And I think this was the start of that, this particular round. And I was super excited to get to watch you all year. And I'm hoping that we don't see too much of you guys this year, although those rounds are always fun. But I'm looking forward to seeing what you do with your last year at UCLA.
I appreciate it, man. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to actually like competing in person again, hopefully, and getting to travel with the team. It was really fun what we did this last year, but if we could recreate some of that success while also getting to like travel places and go visit cool courtrooms, that'd be awesome. But yeah, man, thank you for having me on, and it's always a pleasure talking to you. For those of you who don't know, Phil is like one of the godfathers of mock trial out there that, those of us who are trying to learn this stuff can always go to and ask like for advice or anything. Phil's always been super great. So I appreciate that. And hopefully we don't see you guys too many times this year, but if we do, it's going to be a good round.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. Your check's in the mail. And I also think hilarious that as soon as a guy named Pasquarello becomes the trial competition director, the Godfather references start. So I think it's apt being called a Godfather. So that's cool. In our last 20 seconds, tell everyone what you're doing this summer.
Oh yeah, so I'm working at a mid-sized firm in New York City, doing it's a general service firm, but I'm interested in doing some criminal defense work. And yeah, hopefully prepping for an actual trial and getting ready to start my life no longer doing mock trials. But that's where I am this summer. I'll be back in LA for 3L and have one last year of mock trial competition.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. This was one of my, this is right at the top of my list of things I wanted to watch. And so I really appreciate you making it happen. Thanks so much for everyone who, like Enrico said, has made it this far. We really appreciate it. I hope you had some fun watching it with us. And if there are any videos you want us to watch or people you want us to have on, let us know and we'll do our best to get those people on. Thanks for watching WatchMock.